There was a time when I thought we had it all. The Matthews house on Ashwood Drive was the kind of place that made neighbors slow their cars just to look. Red brick, black shutters, a circular driveway with white gravel so clean it crunched like sugar under tires. Inside, there were skylights in the kitchen and a staircase wide enough to host a wedding party. My dad, Ray Matthews, owned Matthews Custom Builders, one of the most sought-after construction companies in Phoenix. He wore work boots in the morning and pressed shirts by dinner. He smelled like sawdust and Irish spring soap. To me, he was indestructible. My mom, Vivian, never stepped outside without her lipstick and heels. Even on Sundays, she was elegant, striking, the kind of woman who turned heads at PTA meetings. She coordinated our Christmas trees by color scheme and always made sure our family photos looked like magazine spreads. My older sister, Delilah, was popular at school, good at tennis, and better at pretending we were perfect. And me? I was 10 when the world still made sense, when steak was normal and vacations meant coastal houses with sun-bleached decks. When my biggest worry was whether the pool heater was working. We lived a life of clean countertops and monogrammed towels, of Amazon Prime deliveries, Apple Watches, and dinner reservations booked weeks in advance. We were a we don't do leftovers kind of family. At least, that's what Mom used to say. Looking back now, I realize we weren't perfect. We were just undisturbed. And disturbance, like a slow leak under your floorboards, doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it waits, quietly expanding until it breaks everything you thought was solid. It started with the housing crash. One project fell through, then another. The calls stopped coming. Clients backed out. Workers were laid off. Then came the lawsuits. Insurance wouldn't cover it all. I remember one night seeing Dad sitting alone in the kitchen. The lights were off except for the one above the sink. His elbows rested on the table, head in his hands. That was the first time I realized a man could still be strong, even when he's crumbling. He kept it from us for a while, or tried to, but bills are louder than silence. Then one morning, while buttering her toast, Vivian asked, "Ray, when was the last time a check cleared?" Her voice wasn't panicked, it was cold, precise. Dad didn't answer. She set the knife down like it had betrayed her. "I didn't marry you for this." The house was listed 2 months later, my room packed into cardboard boxes that smelled like regret. Delilah cried one night, then posted a selfie the next morning with the caption, "New chapter loading." We moved into a one-story rental in an older part of town. The walls were beige, the carpet was rough. We had a single garage with a cracked driveway and a leaky faucet that Dad fixed the first night with his bare hands. But Mom didn't see resilience. She saw failure. Vivian stopped being my mother the day the last contract fell through. It didn't happen with a scream or a slammed door. It was quieter than that, colder. She started sleeping later, refusing to cook, rolling her eyes when Dad came home in work-stained jeans. One night, I caught her staring at herself in the bathroom mirror, whispering to no one, "This isn't who I am. This isn't who I married." Another night, when Dad returned from selling his last company truck, she met him at the door, not with concern, but with disgust. "You look like someone who fixes gutters," she said, "not someone I used to dress up for." Dad didn't flinch. He just stepped aside and let her pass, carrying his dignity like a sack of bricks. She stopped using his name, called him he or your father, like saying Ray tasted bitter, and she started answering unknown calls in the garage, whispers, soft laughter, always ending with a long silence and her fixing her hair before walking back in. Then came the day she said it out loud. "I'm not staying here while he sinks this family. I didn't work this hard to eat off plastic plates." She packed her jewelry before she packed her books. folded her designer scarves with more care than she ever gave Dad's flannels. When she filed for divorce, she didn't ask, she demanded. She wanted half, not half of what we had, half of what we once were, and worst of all, she wanted the house, our last place of memory, the one Dad kept for me with bleeding hands and broken pride. "It's mine as much as it is yours," she said at mediation, crossing her legs like a queen at war. Dad looked at her, his voice barely a whisper. "Viv, the boy needs a home. Leave the house." She didn't blink. "Then buy me out." That was the moment I stopped hoping she'd come back. Not to us, not to herself. She had already become someone else. Mom left on a Thursday. She didn't cry, didn't hug me goodbye. She wore a pale blue blazer, matching heels, and that dark plum lipstick she always reserved for interviews and anniversaries. She pulled a Louis Vuitton carry-on behind her and stepped into the black Lincoln SUV that had been waiting at the curb. The man driving it didn't step out to help. He didn't wave. "That's Graham," Delilah said, her voice tight with admiration. "He's connected." Graham Whitmore, a name that sounded like it came with silk ties and silent power. He was older than Mom, widowed, or so she claimed, made his money in real estate and private equity, whatever that meant. What I knew was this: his suits were tailored and his smiles never reached his eyes. They moved to Los Angeles, Brentwood specifically. Mom called it a clean break, but really it was a complete erasure. A new city, new clothes, new friends. She changed her last name back to Blake on social media. Soon after, Delilah followed her there. "This is where life actually happens, Caleb," she told me on the phone. "Dad's world is small. You'll see it one day." I didn't reply. I just stared out our kitchen window in Prescott, where Dad and I had moved after selling what was left of the business. The backyard was patchy. The sink creaked when you turned it on. But the air smelled like earth, and Dad always made coffee before I even got up. Meanwhile, Mom was building a whole new mythology online. Her Instagram turned into a highlight reel of opulence. Poolside brunches, rooftop yoga, Napa Valley tastings, captions like, "Self-worth is the real currency." Surround yourself with people who elevate you. Hard to be humble when you're this blessed. Her smile was flawless, her skin glowing, her glass always filled with something golden. The comments were full of hearts and flame emojis, from women with names like Brielle and Madison, all calling her queen and goals. But I knew better, because behind those filters I saw something else. Tension in the eyes, the kind that makeup can't hide. The way her fingers always curled around the stem of her wine glass, like she was holding on to something fragile. And then there was Graham. He was never in the pictures, only hints. His Bentley in the background, the edge of a cigar on the table, the word private whispered like a brand. Delilah called him generous, said he was busy but powerful, told me he once flew them to Vancouver just because it was too foggy in Malibu. But she never mentioned how often he disappeared, how Mom would pace the condo waiting for his calls, how the staff referred to her as the lady guest. When I turned 16, I didn't hear from Mom. Not a card, not a call. But that week she posted a story at some 5-star resort in Tulum, dancing in a silk robe under neon lights, tagging it, "Here's to rising higher, always." Dad didn't say much about her. He never did. He'd just pat my shoulder when I came in late from school and ask, "How was math?" But once when I brought up Mom, after one of Delilah's posts went viral, he looked up from his coffee and said, "Everyone gets to chase their version of freedom, Caleb. But some people forget that you can't trade people for comfort and expect it not to cost you later." Then he went back to reading the paper. About a year later, cracks started to show. Graham's appearances became rare. Mom stopped posting photos for weeks. When she did, they were filtered within an inch of recognition. Angles, shadows, nothing real. Her captions changed too. People only support you when you're shining. Never confuse silence with loyalty. Delilah called one night, her voice whispery, scared. Something's off. He hasn't been home in days. Mom's crying a lot. I don't know what to do. I almost said leave, but didn't. Instead, I asked if she was safe. She paused, then said, "He has a wife, Caleb. He's married. Like, full-on married. A judge's daughter. Old money." And suddenly, it all made sense. Mom was never going to be Mrs. Whitmore. She was just a seasonal luxury. 2 months later, Graham was gone. Condo keys deactivated, credit cards frozen. Even her gym membership was canceled. He didn't even have the decency to break up in person. He just removed her, like she was a loose thread. I saw one last photo of her, posted by someone else not long after. She was sitting alone at a rooftop bar, a glass of wine, untouched. Her eyes looked past the horizon as if searching for a version of herself that had never really existed. No filters, no captions, just reality catching up. There was no explosion, no storm, just silence. After Mom left, the house felt hollow in places I hadn't known existed. Drawers that didn't get used, rooms that stayed dark, a perfume smell that lingered longer than it should have. Delilah left with her. She didn't say goodbye, just posted a photo from the passenger seat of Graham Whitmore's Mercedes with a caption that read, "Time to step into something better." She looked thrilled, free, like none of this had ever meant anything. Dad never raised his voice, never slammed a door. He simply came home, took off his boots, and washed his hands like he always did. But he slept less. Sometimes I'd find him sitting at the kitchen table at 3 a.m., mug of cold coffee in front of him, eyes staring into nothing. He was rebuilding, quietly, relentlessly. By then, we'd moved again, this time to Prescott, a small town tucked between pine forests and fading ambition, the kind of place where everyone knows when you mow your lawn late and gossip travels faster than phone signals. Dad found us a modest duplex near a laundromat and a Mexican grocery, 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. The porch creaked, but it held. He got a job at a local lumber yard, then picked up side gigs fixing sheds, repainting fences, clearing brush, whatever paid. He never complained, but I could see it in his shoulders, each movement a little slower, every breath a little heavier. I started doing the grocery runs, learned to cook simple things, eggs, grilled cheese, chicken stir-fry. We couldn't afford takeout, and even if we could, we didn't want it. We had a rhythm, quiet but strong. No shouting, no make-up smiles, just 2 men figuring out how to be a family again. Meanwhile, Delilah's social media became a theater of extravagance. Photos in designer boutiques, mirrored elevators, champagne flutes, hashtags like level up, stay golden, grateful vibes. But her smiles began to look curated. Sometimes I'd catch her eyes flicking off camera, like someone was watching, or worse, someone had stopped watching. Then came the shift. Less posting, more quotes. Be careful who you trust. The devil was once an angel. Sometimes silence is the loudest betrayal. And finally, nothing at all. I didn't hear from her for 6 months. Then one night, she called. I almost didn't recognize her voice. It was small, scraped raw. "Caleb, do you think Dad would let me come visit?" There was no apology, no explanation, but I said yes, because Dad would have wanted that. She arrived a week later, no luggage, no heels, just a worn-out hoodie and a tote bag with a broken zipper. Her eyes were tired in a way that makeup can't fix. She didn't talk about Mom much, just said she wasn't well, that Graham had vanished. that the money was gone. I found out later that Delilah had been working nights at a diner in Burbank, trying to pay rent while Mom spiraled. The condo was lost, the lifestyle evaporated, and Mom, she'd been admitted to a mental health facility in West Hollywood, diagnosed with manic depressive disorder and PTSD. She didn't recognize herself anymore. Sometimes didn't recognize Delilah either. I visited her once. The walls were pale green, the hallways too clean. She sat in a chair near the window, watching the parking lot like it might turn into something else. When I said her name, she looked up and smiled. "Are you the nurse?" My throat tightened. I didn't answer, just sat with her for a while. She talked about a yacht she never owned, a wedding that never happened, said something about flying to Milan for a fashion show. And then she whispered, "He said I was special." The silence that followed was louder than any scream. Dad never asked what she said, never asked if I'd go back. He just kept showing up, at work, at home, for me. One night, as we folded laundry together, I asked, "How do you not hate her?" He paused, folding one of my old t-shirts into a perfect square. "Because hate rots the one who holds it, not the one it's aimed at." He looked at me. "Besides, she gave me you." Rebuilding doesn't look like a Hollywood montage. There's no inspirational soundtrack, no dramatic crane shots, just dirt under your nails, receipts in your glove compartment, and long stretches of silence where hope feels like a rumor. But Ray Matthews rebuilt anyway. It started with a fence. Our neighbor's dog kept escaping, and Dad offered to fix the broken gate. Didn't ask for money, just said, "Let me help you keep her safe." They gave him a $20 tip and a recommendation. That turned into painting a deck, which turned into refitting a garage door, which turned into building a patio for the couple up the street, celebrating their 25th anniversary. People started calling him Ray the Builder. He got business cards printed at the library, bought a used pickup with a cracked windshield but a working bed. By the time I was 17, we weren't just surviving anymore. We were building. I started helping him on weekends. At first just to be near him, then because I liked it. He taught me how to measure twice, cut once, how to sand along the grain, how to show up early, stay late, and never charge more than what you'd pay yourself. One night, while retiling someone's bathroom floor, I asked him, "How did you know how to do all this?" He looked up from the grout bucket and smiled. "I didn't. I just figured, if I can build a house for strangers, I can build a life for us." That night, we drove home in the dark with our windows down, covered in sawdust, listening to Springsteen. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was missing anything. We didn't talk much about Mom, not because it hurt, but because it didn't matter anymore. Delilah stayed with us for a while, got a job at the hardware store, started taking night classes at the community college. She laughed more, cried less, and one day she even asked Dad to show her how to fix a sink. He did, without hesitation. That's who he was. No grudges, just tools and time and a quiet kind of grace. On my 18th birthday, I came home to find a cake on the table and a wrapped box with a note. To Caleb, this isn't just a toolbox. It's everything I've ever learned about rebuilding. You already have the rest. Dad. Inside was a full set of wrenches, a level, a folding tape, and his old hammer. I've kept that hammer to this day. Not because it's valuable, but because it was the first time I realized I didn't need to inherit money. I inherited a blueprint. That summer, we landed a job restoring a fire-damaged barn on the outskirts of Prescott. It was the biggest job we'd had. 6 weeks of hauling, lifting, sweating under the Arizona sun. The owner, an old rancher named Will, watched us every day from his porch. On the last day, as we packed up our tools, he walked over and said, "I seen a lot of crews come and go, But the way you two work, like you're building something that matters, I haven't seen that in years." Dad just nodded, wiped his hands on a rag. "Every nail is a decision." The rancher clapped him on the shoulder. "You ever think of expanding?" Dad looked at me, then smiled. That was the beginning of Matthews and Son Carpentry. No billboards, no social media, just phone calls and word of mouth. But it grew, because good work always finds a way. I never expected to get a phone call from West Hollywood again, but when the nurse at St. Helena's psychiatric facility called, I recognized the number before I recognized the name. "Your mother's condition is stable but worsening. We believe long-term care is now necessary." She paused. "There are no other emergency contacts. You're the only family on record." I sat in the cab of the truck, our old red Ford with faded paint and a busted AC, and stared out at the desert. The heat shimmered like glass on the hood. Mom hadn't said my name in 5 years, and now I was the only one who could sign her future. I told Dad that night over coffee. He didn't say much, just stirred his cup slowly and said, "What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to ignore it, pretend she never existed." He nodded, then looked at me. Really looked. "You could do that, and no one would blame you, but the world's got enough people walking away from people when they're broken." The next week I flew to Los Angeles. The city felt smaller somehow, louder but emptier, like a parade after the band's gone home. Mom was thinner, hair grayer, eyes duller, but still her. She looked at me, confused. "You look like your father," she said quietly. Then after a beat, "That's not a compliment." I smiled. "It is to me." She laughed, a real one, then started crying. I sat there for 2 hours while she talked about things that never happened. Vacations in Paris, a house in the Hamptons, a jewelry line she never launched. But somewhere in the middle she said something that stuck with me. I thought I could outgrow love, that I could replace it with luxury, but it turns out luxury doesn't tuck you in at night. She fell asleep holding my hand. I signed the paperwork, paid the deposit, arranged the insurance. I didn't tell her I'd be covering the costs. Didn't want her to feel shame, didn't want to feel anything myself. But when I left, I walked by the front desk, paused and asked the nurse, "Has anyone else visited her lately?" She checked. "Not in over 3 years." I came home to Prescott and told Dad everything. He nodded slowly, then reached into the cabinet, pulled down a photo of her from the early days, back when she wore denim jackets and stood next to him at construction sites. "She was good once," he said. "Or, at least, she wanted to be." He put the photo back and walked out to the garage. I followed. That night, under the yellow bulb of the garage light, we worked side by side rebuilding a table for a neighbor's kitchen. As I drilled, Dad handed me a board and said, "You know what people think inheritance means? Money, land, wills." He shook his head. "But inheritance is what sticks when you lose everything. It's what you carry when your hands are empty." He looked at me. "You carry me, Caleb." That's enough. The next morning, I got a letter from the facility. Mom had listed me as next of kin. The paperwork was simple. If anything happened, I was in charge. I stared at the signature. Vivian Blake. Even now, she didn't want the name Matthews, and I realized then she never really did. But that was okay, because I carried it. I carried Matthews like a badge, like a nail worn through a belt, like a truth whispered over morning coffee. I carried it through every beam I raised, every bill I paid, every time I showed up when someone didn't deserve it, and that was enough. Mom died on a Tuesday. I got the call early before sunrise. The nurse's voice was soft, practiced. She passed in her sleep, peacefully, no pain. There was a pause, then. She had your name written on a note beside her bed. Just your name. That was all. I flew to Los Angeles 2 days later. Delilah came too. We hadn't spoken much in months, but when I called, she just said, "She's still our mother." We didn't argue about details. We didn't talk about Graham, or the condo, or the years she forgot we existed. We just met outside the small chapel near the edge of the city, where palm trees cast long shadows and traffic never quite faded. The service was simple. No flowers, no slideshow, just a priest who mispronounced her middle name and a wooden box that looked too small to hold a whole life. Afterward, we stood at the edge of the cemetery near a row of sycamores. I placed the urn on a stone pedestal, while Delilah read a short poem, one Mom had liked years ago, back when she still read books instead of tabloids. Then it was quiet again. Delilah looked at me and said, "Do you hate her?" It was a fair question, one we never asked out loud. I thought about it, about the birthdays she missed, the holidays she spent drinking rosé in rented penthouses, the time she called Dad a failure, the time she looked at me and didn't know who I was. And then I thought about the photo Dad kept, the old one where she laughed beside him in a denim jacket, her face open and unguarded. "No," I said. "I think she was scared. I think she made a bet on the wrong kind of love, and she lost." Delilah nodded. "So did we. We buried the urn beside a tree. No plaque, no stone, just a patch of soil and memory. Before we left, I knelt down and whispered, 'You were wrong, Mom. Love doesn't get replaced by luxury. It gets replaced by silence.' Then I stood up and walked away. That night, back in Prescott, I sat on the porch with Dad. He didn't ask how it went. He just handed me a beer and said, 'She was part of our beginning, but she doesn't have to define our ending.' I nodded. "You know what I realized today?" "What's that?" "She didn't leave us nothing. She left us a choice to become something else." He smiled. "That's the best inheritance of all. I still carry her in small ways. A melody she used to hum, the way she made Sunday pancakes, a scent that sometimes slips through the aisle of a grocery store and catches me off guard. But I carry Dad more, in the way I shake hands, in the way I price a job, in the way I show up for people, even when they don't deserve it. When people ask me what I inherited, I don't say land, or stocks, or silver. I say a toolbox, a story, and a name worth keeping.